The rain that night was merciless, hammering against the cracked sidewalks of New York City, soaking through Marcus's thin hoodie until he shivered so hard his teeth rattled. At 17, he had already learned that the world didn't care if you froze, starved, or disappeared. His stomach had been empty for 2 days, and the scraps he'd picked from a trash can behind a diner had already turned sour in his belly. People passed him without looking, umbrellas shielding them from both the storm and his existence. He hated begging. Hated the way his voice cracked when he whispered, "Please, just some change," only to be ignored like he was invisible. His father had left years ago. His mother? Gone to drugs. The streets were all he had left, and the streets weren't kind. Then she appeared, a girl, no older than 15, her school backpack sagging with books, her shoes muddy from the puddles. She stopped, really stopped, her eyes brown and wide, fixed on him like he was human. Marcus blinked, unsure if she was real or just another trick of exhaustion. "You hungry?" she asked softly, pulling a sandwich wrapped in foil from her bag. He wanted to refuse, pride clawing at him, but his hands betrayed him, trembling as he reached out. She smiled gently, then slipped a crumpled $5 bill into his palm. "This is all I've got. Don't waste it, okay?" The bill felt heavier than gold. He couldn't speak, only nod, as she turned and hurried into the rain. Marcus sat there, long after she vanished into the storm, the sandwich untouched in his lap. He stared at that $5 bill, his chest tight with something he didn't understand. It wasn't just money. It was hope. Proof that someone, somewhere believed he mattered. He didn't know it yet, but that single act of kindness would haunt him for the next 20 years. Marcus didn't sleep that night. The sandwich sat half-eaten beside him, but the $5 bill, that he clutched to his chest like a lifeline. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed but still cruel. He lay awake under the overhang of an abandoned store, staring at the stars peeking through broken clouds. "Why me?" he whispered into the night. "Why did she stop?" The truth was, Marcus had been ready to give up. That day, before she appeared, he had thought of walking into traffic, letting the endless noise of the city drown his existence forever. Nobody would have noticed. Nobody would have cared. But one girl, one stranger, saw him. The $5 was small, but in his mind it became a contract. A debt he could never ignore. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about meaning. He whispered a vow into the cold air. "I'll find her again. I don't know how or when, but I will. And when I do, she'll know that her $5 didn't just buy me food, it bought me a future." The next morning, Marcus made a decision. He walked into a grimy public library and started reading. Anything, everything. Books on business, psychology, even finance. He didn't understand half of it, but he was hungry, not just for food anymore, but for knowledge. By night, he hustled odd jobs, sweeping a bar floor, unloading crates for cash, running errands for street vendors. Every dime he saved, he treated like that $5 bill. Precious, sacred. And whenever life hit him hardest, and it did, with betrayals, hunger, and nights too cold to survive, he remembered her face, the heinous in her eyes. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something deeper, a fire. In that fire, Marcus forged his first promise to himself. "I will never be invisible again." 3 months later, Marcus stood outside a coffee shop downtown, the kind of place where men in pressed suits carried laptops and spoken voices filled with confidence. He had managed to save $87 from odd jobs. To most, it was pocket change. To him, it was a fortune, nearly 3 months of sweat, hunger, and stubborn grit. Inside, he spotted a flyer pinned to the wall. Intern wanted, no experience, small tech startup. He didn't even know what startup really meant. But he knew this. It was better than freezing on the streets. The next morning, Marcus showed up at the small office, a shoebox space above a laundromat, where three young men argued over cables and code. The oldest, maybe mid-20s, looked him up and down. "You're homeless, aren't you?" he asked flatly. Marcus froze. The shame hit hard, but he lifted his chin. "Yes, but I'll work harder than anyone you've ever met." There was silence. Then one of the men smirked. "Fine. No pay. You sweep, run errands, learn if you can." And just like that, Marcus's life shifted. He slept on the floor of the office, swept daily, fetched coffee, and asked questions. 1,000 questions. At first they laughed. Then slowly they stopped laughing because he absorbed everything. How code worked, how deals were pitched, how money flowed. One night, after everyone left, Marcus stayed behind, staring at the glowing lines of code on a screen. He didn't understand it fully, but he saw patterns, logic. He copied notes by hand, teaching himself in secret. Weeks became months. The men who once dismissed him began asking his opinion. He wasn't just the errand boy anymore. He was learning to think like them. But Marcus wasn't like them. He wasn't building for a quick payday. He was building for something far greater, a future where he could rewrite his story. And as he tucked that solemn $5 bill into his worn wallet, he whispered again, "I'll find you. I promise." By the time Marcus turned 19, the small startup had grown. Investors began visiting the cramped office, promising funding, talking about scalability and exit strategies, words Marcus barely knew a year earlier. But he understood one thing: money was finally in reach. One late evening, Marcus overheard a conversation he wasn't supposed to. The founders sat around a table, contracts spread out, their voices low. "What about Marcus?" one asked. The other laughed. "Marcus? He's not on paper. He's not part of the company. He's just the kid who sweeps floors and fetches coffee. But he's been helping with the product." "Doesn't matter, he's nothing. Once we get the investment, he's gone." The words sliced deeper than any cold night on the street ever had. Marcus stepped back, his chest burning with anger and shame. For a year, he had given everything: his time, his hunger, his belief that loyalty meant something. And now he was nothing more than disposable. That night, lying on the office floor, he stared at the ceiling and made another vow. Never again will I depend on anyone to decide my worth." The next morning, he walked out. No goodbye, no explanation. He had no savings, no job, nowhere to sleep. But he carried something far more valuable: knowledge. He had watched every pitch, memorized every investor's name, studied every contract. Marcus began showing up at networking events he had no invitation to. He slipped past doors, pretended to belong, and listened. He learned how deals were made, how money moved, how power shifted hands. He had no suit, no business card, just raw determination. People looked at him strangely, some even mocked him, but a few, just a few, noticed the fire in his eyes. And it was one of those people, a gray-haired venture capitalist named Daniel Reed, who finally asked him the question that would change everything. "Kid, you don't belong here, so why are you here?" Marcus didn't flinch, because one day I will, and when I do, I won't just belong, I'll own the room. Daniel Reed was not the kind of man people ignored. At 60, he was lean, silver-haired, always in tailored suits that smelled faintly of expensive cigars. When he entered a room, conversations shifted. He had built empires, bankrupted rivals, and walked away with a reputation as one of Wall Street's sharpest sharks. And yet, on that rainy Thursday evening, His attention was on a ragged 19-year-old standing stubbornly in a lobby full of polished professionals. "You've got guts, kid," Daniel said, narrowing his eyes, "but guts don't get you far in this city. What do you know about business?" Marcus straightened his shoulders, heart pounding. "Enough to know I don't want to beg for scraps. Enough to know investors don't bet on ideas. They bet on people. I don't have a suit or a degree, but I learn faster than anyone you've ever met." Dan studied him for a long moment, the way a hunter studies prey. Then, unexpectedly, he chuckled. "Bold. I like bold. Fine. You'll come to my office tomorrow at 7 sharp. Don't be late." That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He had no bed, no home, but he rehearsed answers to questions Daniel might ask. He borrowed a shirt from a thrift store, pressed it with a stranger's iron, and arrived at 6:45 the next morning. Daniel didn't hand him a job. Instead, he tested him. He tossed Marcus a stack of financial reports and said, "Tell me what's wrong with this company." Marcus didn't know accounting. He didn't know corporate jargon, but he knew survival. He scanned the reports and noticed patterns, spending too much in one area, not enough in another. He circled them with a blunt pencil and explained in plain language. Daniel leaned back, impressed. "You think like a businessman, rough, polished, but sharp." For the next 2 years, Ashan Mercusul shadowed him. He became Daniel's shadow, learning the ruthless art of negotiation, the subtleties of reading people, the way power disguised itself in smiles and handshakes. But Marcus was different. Unlike the shark circling Wall Street, he wasn't chasing wealth for the thrill of it. For him, every dollar, every deal was another brick in the empire he was building, not just for himself, but for the promise he made years ago, under the rain, with a $5 bill clutched to his chest. And Daniel, hardened and cynical, found himself wondering for the first time in years, what drives this boy so relentlessly? Marcus was 22 when it happened. The deal wasn't grand by Wall Street standards, just a mid-sized acquisition of a failing logistics company. Daniel had let him lead the negotiations as a test, and Marcus, sharp and relentless, drove the price down so hard that even seasoned investors were stunned. When the ink dried, Marcus walked away with his first cut, just over $1 million. He stared at the check in disbelief, running his fingers across the ink like it might vanish if he blinked. A boy who once begged for coins on a rainy sidewalk was now holding more money than he ever thought possible. He celebrated that night, not in luxury, but in silence. He sat in a small apartment Daniel had helped him rent, placed the check on the table, and pulled it out the old, worn $5 bill he'd carried for years. He set them side by side, one crisp, a symbol of power, the other faded, a symbol of mercy. And the truth hit him like a knife. The million didn't feel like victory, it felt hollow. Because the person who made it possible, the girl with the backpack and the kind eyes, was still a ghost in his memory. He had no name, no clue where she lived, no way of telling her that her $5 had multiplied 100,000 times over. Daniel noticed the change in him. "You should be proud," he said one afternoon in his sleek office overlooking Manhattan. "Most men spend their whole lives chasing what you've already achieved." Marcus smiled faintly. "It's not enough." Daniel frowned. "You sound ungrateful." "No," Marcus said quietly. I sound unfinished." That night, instead of sleeping, he made another decision. If money couldn't bring her to him, he would use money to go find her. He began hiring private investigators, spending tens of thousands to track a girl he'd known for only 5 minutes, 20 years ago. People called him obsessed. Maybe he was. But Marcus knew the truth. that $5 wasn't just kindness, it was a seed, and seeds deserved to see what they grew into. By 25, Marcus was no longer just a wealthy young man. He was a force. Daniel guided him at first, but soon Marcus's hunger outpaced even his mentor's vision. He launched businesses in logistics, real estate, and technology, each one climbing to success faster than the last. His name began circulating in the financial press, the street's young maverick. But knew his real motive. Every new company wasn't just about profit. It was a calculated move. Marcus built offices in cities where she might live: Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, Dallas. Each location was a chance, a net cast wide across America. For every new office, he gave his investigators a new lead, a new trail to follow. "Why are you spreading yourself so thin?" Daniel asked one evening over brandy. "Expansion is good, but you're not strategic. You're emotional." Marcus swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his eyes cold. "Business is always emotional. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Daniel leaned back, studying him. "You're chasing something, Marcus. But wealth won't fill whatever hole you're digging at." Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth was, the girl haunted him. He could still see the way her hair clung to her face in the rain, the way her voice trembled when she said, "Don't waste it." He had built skyscrapers, commanded boardrooms, and signed deals worth hundreds of millions, but none of it silenced that memory. His investigators came back with reports, hundreds of women who might match her description. Marcus read them all, studied faces, compared smiles. Each time, disappointment cut deeper. Still, he refused to stop. "Find her," he told them again and again, "whatever it costs." Behind the scenes, his obsession was shaping his empire. Billion-dollar ventures disguised a personal quest. Each company was a landmark on his secret map, one that pointed not to markets, but to a girl with a backpack who had given him hope when the world gave him nothing. And as his fortune soared, whispers began spreading. Why does Marcus build so much, so fast, and yet seems so restless? Simple. Because every boardroom, every city, every skyscraper was just another message to her. "I'm still looking." Marcus was 30 when one of his investigators walked into his Manhattan penthouse with a folder that looked heavier than paper should. "Think we found her," the man said. Marcus froze. His pulse thundered in his ears as he reached for the file. Inside were photos: a woman, late 20s, with soft brown eyes, hair that fell in waves, and a smile that could have been pulled straight from his memory. Her name was Lily Harper, a schoolteacher in Chicago, single, known for volunteering at shelters. Marcus stared at the photo until his vision blurred. For the first time in years, he felt lighter. Could this really be her? Could the girl who gave him $5 now be shaping young lives in classrooms? Within 48 hours, his jet touched down in Chicago. His company had an office there, but this trip wasn't about business. He rented a black car, drove past the modest school where she worked, and waited. When Lily finally emerged, laughing with colleagues, Marcus's chest tightened. It was her. It had to be. That evening, he walked into a small diner she often visited, nerves twisting his stomach, an unfamiliar feeling for a man who commanded billion-dollar deals without blinking. He approached her table. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I think we may have met before. Or many years ago." Lily looked up, her expression kind but puzzled. "I don't think so. I'm sorry, do I know you?" Marcus's voice faltered. "New York City, a rainy night. You gave me—" Her brow furrowed, then she shook her head gently. That wasn't me." The words hit him like a punch. Marcus smiled politely, masking the storm inside. My mistake? You just reminded me of someone I once knew. He walked out into the night, the city lights blurring through his unshed tears. For years he had built his empire, chasing a ghost. And now, faced with a woman who looked like her but wasn't, he realized something terrifying. He didn't just remember her face, he was afraid of forgetting it. And so his search grew darker, deeper. No longer just a quest. It was survival. Because if he couldn't find her, if time erased her completely, then everything he had built would mean nothing. By 32, Marcus's net worth had crossed 2 billion. The media called him the relentless visionary. His companies stretched across continents, his face graced magazine covers, and Wall Street worshipped him. But behind the glossy headlines, there were whispers. At board meetings, Marcus's executives exchanged wary glances. He poured millions into projects that made little sense, opening offices in obscure towns, funding random community events, even sponsoring schools in neighborhoods far from his corporate interests. To the public, it looked like philanthropy. To his investors, it looked reckless. One evening, Daniel confronted him in his penthouse. The old man, now more a father than mentor, slammed a glass onto the marble counter. "What the hell are you doing, Marcus? You've built an empire most men only dream of, and you're risking it all on, what, ghost hunts?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "You wouldn't understand." "Then make me understand," Daniel snapped. "Do you even remember why you started this journey? Was it wealth, power, legacy? Because right now, you're throwing it away." Marcus turned to the window, staring at the glittering skyline he practically owned. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "It was her." Daniel blinked. "Her?" "The girl. The one who gave me $5 when I had nothing. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. I've built all of this because of her, and I can't stop until I find her." Daniel sighed, suddenly looking older than his years. "Marcus, obsession destroys kings faster than poverty. Don't let it destroy you." But Marcus wasn't listening. That night, he doubled the budget for his investigators, ordering them to search not just the US, but the world. He launched new branches in Europe, Asia, Africa, each expansion justified on paper. But in truth, every office was another fishing net cast into the ocean of possibility. The empire grew, yes, but so did the cracks. Investors grew nervous, rivals circled, the media began asking questions. And through it all, Marcus whispered the same words every night as he lay in his empty penthouse, staring at the faded $5 bill locked in a glass frame by his bed. "Don't waste it, don't waste it, don't waste it." The lead came on an ordinary Tuesday. Marcus was in Hong Kong, finalizing a deal that would add another zero to his fortune, when his head investigator called. "We found her." Marcus's pen slipped from his fingers. His heart, usually steady as stone in negotiations, hammered against his ribs. "Where?" "Brooklyn. Her name's Sarah Mitchell. We cross-checked school records, hospital logs, even public cameras from 2 decades ago. She matches the description, the timeline, everything." Marcus cancelled his meetings on the spot. Within hours, his jet sliced through the night sky, racing back to New York. The drive to Brooklyn felt longer than all the years he'd spent searching. His limousine crawled past old neighborhoods, places that smelled of asbestos, wet concrete, fried food, rust. His chest tightened as memories clawed at him. The rain, the hunger, the shame, and then the kindness. At last, he stood before a modest brownstone. The door creaked open, and there she was. Older, yes. Life had carved lines on her face, but her eyes, those same brown eyes. Marcus froze, breath catching in his throat. For 2 decades, he had carried that memory, and now it stood flesh and blood before him. "Can I help you?" she asked, cautious but polite. Marcus swallowed hard. "You don't remember me, but 20 years ago, you gave a homeless boy $5 and a sandwich." His voice cracked on the words. "That boy was me." Her expression shifted. Confusion, then recognition, then something Marcus hadn't expected, sadness. I, I do remember," she whispered. "I thought about you for years. Wondered if you survived." Marcus's chest burned. "I didn't just survive. I built an empire. Because of you." Her eyes filled with the tears. But then she shook her head. "Marcus, I wasn't supposed to be there that night. I wasn't even supposed to have that money. It wasn't mine to give." Marcus blinked, stunned. "What do you mean?" Sarah's voice trembled. "That $5, it belonged to someone else, someone I lost, and giving it to you was my way of letting go." The air between them turned heavy, charged with a truth Marcus had never considered. That $5 wasn't just a gift. It was a burden, a farewell, a wound. And suddenly, Marcus realized he hadn't just been chasing gratitude. He'd been chasing a ghost of hers as much as his own. Marcus sat across from Sarah in her modest living room, the billion-dollar titan suddenly feeling like that trembling boy on the street again. The silence stretched, heavy with years of unspoken memories. Finally, Sarah spoke. Her voice was quiet, like someone recalling a dream they wished they could forget. "My brother's name was David," she began. "He was 15, a year younger than me. He'd been sick for a long time. Cancer. We didn't have much money, but my parents scraped together everything to pay for his treatments." Marcus's chest tightened. Sarah's eyes glistened, but she forced herself to continue. "The night I met you, he had just passed away. I was walking home from the hospital with nothing but his backpack on my shoulders. Inside was his lunchbox. He hadn't touched it that day. And in his pocket, I found $5, the last thing he ever carried." She paused, her hands trembling. "I couldn't hold on to it. I couldn't carry that reminder. When I saw you on the street, soaked and hungry, it felt like fate. Like David wanted me to give it to you instead. Like his life should at least mean hope for someone else." Marcus's throat ached. He pressed his hand against his chest, struggling to breathe. That night had haunted him for decades, but he had never once imagined it was born from someone else's grief. Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "You weren't just a boy I helped, Marcus. You were a way for me to let go. I didn't save you. You saved me." Marcus leaned forward, his voice raw. "Do you know what that $5 did? It became my anchor, my promise. I built everything I have because I couldn't waste it. I couldn't waste him." For the first time in years, Marcus wept. Billionaire, empire builder, visionary, none of it mattered. In that moment, he was just the boy who had been given a gift of hope, wrapped in sorrow. And Sarah, watching him, realized something too, that $5 had never truly left her brother. It had multiplied, transformed, lived on in a way neither of them could have imagined. The next morning, Marcus stood by Sarah's window, staring out at the quiet Brooklyn street. Children walked to school, with backpacks bouncing. Neighbors carried groceries, the ordinary rhythm of life. It felt alien to him, too simple, too peaceful, a world he had long abandoned for skyscrapers and boardrooms. Sarah joined him with 2 mugs of coffee. "You look like a man who hasn't rested in years," she said softly. Marcus forced a chuckle. "Rest is for men who have finished. I'm not finished." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then set her mug down. "Marcus, you've spent 20 years looking for me, but you weren't really looking for me. You were looking for meaning." Her words struck like a blade. He turned, bristling. "Everything I've done, the companies, the billions, the power, I built it because of you, because of what you gave me." No, she said firmly, her eyes locking onto his. You built it because you refused to stay broken, because you had fire in you all along. I didn't give you that. My brother didn't give you that. That was you. Marcus's breath caught. The words were true, yet they felt unbearable. She continued, softer now. Do you know what I see when I look at you? A man who conquered the world, yet still acts like the boy on the sidewalk, begging for permission to exist. You don't need me to validate your life, Marcus. You need to decide what your life really stands for. The silence pressed between them. Marcus's mind spun with memories, the long nights studying in a library, the betrayal at the startup, the first million, the endless expansions, all of it driven by a ghost. I thought finding you would close the circle, he admit, voice cracking. But all I feel is empty. Sarah touched his arm gently. Because you were never supposed to find me. You were supposed to find yourself. For the first time in decades, Marcus felt unmoored. His empire, his fortune, his relentless search, what if it had all been a cage built from grief? The question lingered, heavier than any deal he had ever signed. Had Marcus been building an empire, or had he been running from the boy he used to be? Marcus returned to Manhattan that night, but the city felt different. The skyline he once worshipped now looked like a prison of steel and glass. His penthouse, filled with rare art and polished marble, felt hollow. Even the framed $5 bill on his wall seemed less like a trophy and more like a wound. For days he shut himself away. Meetings were cancelled, deals delayed. His board grew restless. Investors called in panic. But Marcus ignored them all. He sat alone, replaying Sarah's words. You weren't really looking for me. You were looking for meaning. On the fourth night, Daniel came. The old man stood in the doorway of Marcus's study, watching him sit in darkness. Founder, Daniel said quietly. Marcus nodded. Yes, but it didn't give me what I thought it would. Daniel poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to him. That's the curse of men like us. We climb mountains thinking peace waits at the top, but all we find is another mountain. Marcus stared into his glass. So what now? Do I keep chasing ghosts? Keep building until I own the world? Daniel studied him, then asked the one question Marcus had avoided for years. What do you want your name to mean when you're gone? The words sank deep. Legacy. It wasn't about net worth, skyscrapers, or magazine covers. It was about what endured. That night, Marcus Asakos made a decision. The next morning, he called an emergency press conference. Cameras flashed as the billionaire everyone called Relentless stepped to the podium. His voice was steady, but his heart pounded. For 20 years, I've built companies, signed deals, and chased numbers, Marcus began. But the truth is, all of it started with $5 and a sandwich, a gift from someone who had nothing to spare. That gift saved me, and I've realized something. Wealth isn't power. Wealth is responsibility. Gasps echoed through the room as Marcus announced his next move, the launch of the David Foundation, named after Sarah's late brother, a multi-billion-dollar initiative to feed the homeless, educate abandoned children, and give opportunities to kids who had nothing but hunger and hope. Reporters shouted questions, investors panicked over the billions he pledged, but Marcus felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. For the first time, his empire had meaning. Not for him, not for a ghost, but for the countless boys and girls still sitting on sidewalks, waiting for someone to notice. The press conference made global headlines. Some praised him as a visionary. Others mocked him as reckless. Investors threatened lawsuits. Politicians begged for his support. But Marcus didn't care. For the first time in his life, the noise of the world couldn't touch him. 2 days later, he returned to Brooklyn. Sarah was waiting on the same porch, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You've caused a storm," she said as he walked up. Marcus gave a small smile. "Storms clear the air." She shook her head. "You just gave away billions. Do you realize what that means?" "Yes," he said, pulling something from his jacket pocket. It was a small, elegant black box. "It means I finally understand what that night meant." He opened it. Inside was not jewelry, not diamonds, not a check. It was the same crumpled $5 bill she had given him 20 years ago, preserved in glass, framed in silver. Sarah's breath caught. Her hands trembled as he placed it gently into them. "I carried this everywhere," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "It wasn't money. It was proof that the world hadn't forgotten me, that I was worth saving. And now, I want to give it back to you." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the relic of a forgotten night. "Marcus, I thought you'd hate me for leaving you there, for not doing more." He shook his head. "You gave me all you had, and that was enough to build everything I have now. Sarah, this isn't repayment. It's a return. That $5 belongs to you, but what it started, that belongs to the world." Sarah clutched the glass case to her chest, tears streaming silently. For the first time, Marcus saw her not as the girl who saved him, but as a woman carrying her own grief, her own survival. They sat together in silence as dusk fell over Brooklyn. No titles, no billions, just two souls bound by a moment in the rain, finally at peace. Yet deep inside, Marcus knew there was still one final truth he hadn't told her. The shocking revelation that explained why he had searched for her so relentlessly. The Brooklyn night was quiet, broken only by the hum of distant traffic. Sarah sat holding the framed $5 bill, her fingers trembling against the glass. Marcus stared at her, as if he wanted to say something more, something heavier than all the billions he had ever earned. Finally, she spoke first. "Why me, Marcus? Out of all the people who passed you on those streets, why did you spend your life chasing the face of a girl who gave you $5? Marcus exhaled slowly. His hands tightened around the edge of the porch bench. "Because, Sarah, that night, I wasn't just starving for food. I was starving for a reason to stay alive." Her eyes widened. He swallowed hard. "I was ready to end it that night. The hunger, the cold, the shame, it had broken me. I'd made up my mind. I was going to step off the bridge. But before I could, you appeared. A girl who had nothing, who owed me nothing, gave me hope with $5 and half a sandwich. It wasn't just charity. It was proof that the world still saw me, that my life mattered." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as Marcus's voice cracked. "That's why I searched, Sarah. Not because I couldn't move on, but because I knew. If I ever found you again, I needed to tell you this. You saved my life." Silence deafening. Sarah's sobs shook her shoulders. She dropped the glass case onto the bench and threw her arms around him. For a moment, the billionaire and the broken boy he once was collided, and Marcus felt something money could never buy. Forgiveness, release, love, all in one embrace. After what felt like forever, Sarah pulled back, her face wet with tears but lit with something like peace. "Then let's make sure no one else has to stand on that bridge," she whispered. Nodded, together. And for the first time, the man worth $2.4 billion felt truly rich. $5 changed Marcus's life forever. One click on subscribe could change yours. Don't miss the next story. Now I want to ask you, who was the one person that gave you hope when you needed it most? Share it in the comments, and let's build a community of stories that matter.